Hi, I'm James Ransome. I illustrate children's books, and this is my studio. Welcome to my studio. I've illustrated lots of children's books. I've been illustrating books for over 30 years. So I think I've illustrated around 75 books to date. Some of my books that you may be familiar with, and actually a very appropriate book for what's going on right now, is Germs. If you notice, this book is written by Lisa Klein Ransome, who's my wife, and I do lots of books with her. And we did this book back in, let's see, 2017, we did this book. So this book is 3 years old. It's an idea that came to us because of our kids. We had young kids who weren't washing their hands like they should, and we got the idea to write this book. Other books I've done with my wife Lisa are Game Changers, story about Venus and Serena Williams. I'm a big fan of theirs, especially Venus, and I begged my wife to write this book for years, and finally she wrote it just last year. It came out. And our other book, Before She Was Harriet, the story of Harriet Tubman. Everyone knows the story about Harriet, but this book actually shares with us other things she did beyond helping hundreds of slaves escape through the Underground Railroad and into freedom. And then we have my book that I wrote and illustrated, The Bell Rang. This is a story about a family that's enslaved. Each morning, so this is the family, each morning they wake up to the sound of a bell. So we get to understand what life is like on the slave plantation back in the 1860s. Really about how a family deals with someone who leaves the family. And it just won the Coretta Scott King honor for illustration. I'm very proud of this book. Usually when I write and illustrate books, I do them a little differently than I do my regular books, but this is the first time I did one that's very similar to my regular sort of, the style that I'm known for. But I'm going to talk to you about a lot of my books today while you're here in the studio. But before we do that, I'd like to show you what I'm actually working on now. So this is what I'm currently working on. I'm illustrating a book about the history of basketball. The title of the book is called Hardcourt. As you can see, I work on tracing paper. So I did a drawing first on tracing paper. I have my reference photograph here. And so once I draw it out, then I decide I want to make things longer or shorter, and I take scissors and I cut them and I tape them down. Then I put another piece of tracing paper on top of it, and that's when I do another final drawing. And now and this will be the drawing that I will actually now put down here, and then I will take watercolor paper like this, and of course I'll turn my lights off, and then I'll draw this out onto watercolor paper. And then I will paint it in watercolor. So this is a sketch that I showed my publishing company, and we like this idea, and this is for the end papers. I'm not going to tell you what end papers are. I want you to actually look that up. It's a very common term used in publishing. And another word you can look up is collage. You can go to my Kid Lit TV show, or you can go to YouTube and put my name in, Kid Lit, and you'll see my episode on collaging. So this is going to be a collage. So this drawing will turn into a painting. Then I'm going to do a lot of paintings. I'm going to then cut up and reassemble and glue down and make one whole new piece. So you can see it's quite a bit of work, but it's going to make something very different and something very special, I hope. And these are some of my ideas I've been working with. So I just have to now paint these and then, believe it or not, cut these up into pieces of paper and then glue them back down. So, and that's going to all be done in watercolor. This is my watercolor trays. As you can see, I have one for cool colors and one for warm colors. Right now, these are all very dry, but what I'll do is I'll take my water bottle here and I'll wet them, You usually want to do this an hour before you start painting. And once you wet them, then I have this container here filled with water, and I have these watercolor brushes. I just got some new ones in, and they're a variety of sizes. And my watercolors are kept on the top of this bin here, and I have these flat files here for my supplies. So here's filled with pencils and pens and my stapler. This is my acrylic paints. You see I have lots of different colors in here, lots of big tubes. I paint lots of pencils, as you can see here, all different types of pencils, markers. These are pastel pencils, which I absolutely love, these pastel pencils. And down here is where I have colored pencils. These are very fancy color pencils. I use them all the time. Here's where I have gouache. Gouache is something else that you can look up. This is acrylic gouache, so it's actually a combination of acrylic paints and gouache. And over here is where you have pure gouache. Gouache is a form of watercolors, but again, I'm going to let you look that up. And then in this third drawer here is where I keep my watercolor tubes. So this is from the basketball book. This is another piece as part of the end papers. With this piece, I've already drawn it up on watercolor paper. I've stapled it to my board. To see exactly how I do this, you can watch my video, James Ransome Painting in Watercolors. It's on YouTube also. Now I'd like to share with you some of the books that I've illustrated and some of the things in those books that I find interesting. First we have My Story, My Dance, the story of Robert Battle, the new director of the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. This book was done in pastels. Remember those pencils I showed you earlier? Well, those are all used to create these the artwork in this book. This is also a place where I use a little collaging. If you look at these very early pages, I took paper and I glued it down on top of other paper and then I drew on top of it, which was really a lot of fun. I love the fact that the paper was part of the color that I used for the background. Pastels are a nice, warm, soft material to work with. And one of the things I enjoy the most is when I can use different colors of pastel paper for the background and then draw on top of them. It's really a lot of fun, especially when you get to do these dance scenes where I can actually show the person moving and dancing and spinning in my drawings. So here's a good example of me working in pastels. It's actually the last book I did in pastels. Although I really did enjoy it, it was a lot of long hours because every little mark you have to draw out. Unlike working with a brush where you can actually use a large brush and just swoosh across and get a nice large area covered. With pastel pencils, you have to do every single line as a movement. Next we have Benny Goodman and Teddy Wilson, first integrated jazz band. And this was done in watercolors. One of my favorite books that I've illustrated, especially this night scene with the fireworks going off, this band that I had to create, these very warm paintings showing the city and the country. Teddy Wilson grew up in the country, and I love this patterned wallpaper, the birds looking in as he's listening to music on a record player. And we have just the opposite with Benny Goodman because he grew up in the city. And so in some ways we get these opposites about how they both were introduced to music and then how they went on to work together and create this amazing band. Just really had a lot of fun illustrating this wonderful story that's written by my wife, Lisa Klein Ransome. And the companion book, what I feel is a companion book to this book, is Just a Lucky So-and-So, a story about Louis Armstrong. And here's a good example of how I use my interest in filmmaking to tell this story. Once we get past the end papers and we go to the title page, we can see this paddle boat coming up the Mississippi River. And then I envision this where we would pull out. And we pull out, now the paddle boat is smaller, and we have the big city, and that's New Orleans. probably New Orleans in the 1890s. And then we turn the page and we're zooming in to a section, a part of New Orleans. And we see in this patterned curtain in this window, and we see a silhouette. I use lots of silhouettes in my books also. Probably at least on one page in a book, you'll see a silhouette. And in this silhouette, we see a mother lifting her child up. And then we zoom inside and we see that she's playing with little Louis Armstrong, who's a baby. And whenever we see that pattern, we know we're at Louis Armstrong's house. Here's a good example here. We know he's at his home and he's listening to these musicians as they're passing by. I also, in this book, I use the white of the paper a lot. It's a way of lightening the picture up and making it more integrated with the type. At least I feel that way. This is my newest book, Freedom Bird, written by Jordine Nolan. And this is a story about two enslaved kids. And if you notice, when I first start the book off, we see this bird's eye view because there's a bird in this book that's really an integral part of the storytelling. And I wanted to start off from that bird's perspective. But again, there's a lot of sort of night scenes and other scenes in here that I think are really, really special. And this was just another fun book to illustrate. I just love this story about this bird and these kids and how the bird helps them escape being enslaved. This is a dream. This is the first book that I used collage in. This book was done back in 2006. And at the very first page we see these end papers, you can see me using collage. Now, if you look closely, this young man here is actually the man now who's videotaping me. This is my son Malcolm when he was just, and this is his youngest sister Layla, and this is my cousin, this is my uncle, this is a friend of the family. This is a family picture here, all my mother's sisters and brothers, and other family members here, my cousin. And throughout this book, I use collages mostly in these top portions here is where you see the collaging. This is the very first time I used collaging, and that was in 2006. And I didn't really think about collaging a lot after doing that, although I did have fun doing this. The next time I used collaging was in this book called Germs. And here I use collaging in a little different manner. Here, I collage my own pieces of artwork. So when we turn to this very first page here, you can see where I painted a picture, I cut it out and glued it down on top of another picture. And I did that throughout this book. There's also some small collages. Sometimes it's hard to see. It doesn't stand out as much, again, because I'm basically collaging my own artwork. But here we see this fire is glued down on top of another piece. And here's one of my favorite pages. All these buildings were painted on separate pieces of paper and then cut out and glued down on top of other pieces of paper. I guess a lot of people would do this in Photoshop today, but I like the idea of working with scissors, paper, glue, and all those things. Sometimes I make mistakes, and those mistakes make the artwork more interesting. But all these buildings here were collaged down on top of another piece of artwork. And if you look very closely, right in here, you can see a Pratt store. That's the school I went to in Brooklyn, New York, Pratt Institute, and that's where I met my wife, Lisa. So after doing Germs, with me collaging my own artwork, then I decided to do an entire book using collage, and that's in Game Changers. This entire book is collage, all from found paper or paper I would buy from a store that would cut up and create these shapes and make these pictures. So there's almost no painting at all done in this book. Almost everything is done from pieces of paper that are collaged together. There's some drawing on top of the collage, but it's mostly about the shapes, these large shapes and these patterns that I found, which was really enjoyable. Here's a place where I actually would cut things into the paper and let paper underneath come through. So there's a variety of ways to collage when you're making artwork. Sometimes it's gluing down on top of, and sometimes it's cutting things out and gluing down underneath. Here is one of my favorite pages, and what I liked about this page is the stars are just hole punchers that I've used, and anyone can use hole punchers. It's basically from a craft store. I just took the hole puncher, punched holes in, and underneath I put these colors of yellow and white and things like that. So this was a lot of fun also. My most recent book, done with my wife Lisa again. This is Overground Railroad, and this book I decided to use a combination of collage and watercolor. So we have some pieces some parts of this are watercolor and some pieces are collaged in. So it's a combination of both of those things. And if you were to see these, these are like paper dolls that I would create and then glue them down on top of the paper. So that's something else you can do also. That's a lot of fun. Make paper dolls out of different colors of paper. But all these people are cut pieces of paper, but this suitcase here, this background is all watercolor, on watercolor paper. This is one of my favorite scenes when I'm getting into the train. And if you look at it very closely, you'll see it's mostly shapes of pieces of paper that are cut out, and it gives you, it suggests that these are bodies and people's jackets, coats, and hats, and things like that. So the edge is very important when you're making artwork. Think about the edge of your shape. This is another sketchbook. As I told you about earlier, I have a few different sketchbooks. This is my collage sketchbook. Like I have this stack of papers here from all sorts of things. I've taken some ink and painted over some newspaper, and that's where this comes from. This is a comic book or something someone gave me. I have patterns of paper that I purchased. Sometimes first thing in the morning, I'll just glue down a piece of paper. Then I'll take another piece of paper and glue down next to it. And I'll just sort of let it just sort of happen spontaneously. Like I really like the idea of this sort of black spots going around this sort of newsprint with the black inside, the very limited colors. This one, for example, is mostly in greens. So but before you know it, I started seeing greens in lots of other colors that I may not have seen green in before. It helps me think more as an artist, and not someone who just sort of paints pictures from photographs. And this is one of my favorites. I just love these shapes. The whole idea is to take something and reformat it so it doesn't look like the object that it was before. And that's always a lot of fun. This is very different. These oranges and pinks and reds together, and these violets and blues. This is also one of my favorites. So you can see I do quite a few of these, and this is a way I just sort of experiment and explore. And that's my collage book. I'm going to show you my other real sketchbook. From my book Freedom Bird, I have my sketchbook. Like I said, I have a few different sketchbooks all the time, and things are scattered throughout different sketchbooks. But here's the cover that we finally decided to go with. And this is the sketch for that cover. So this is the one we chose. But you can see I do lots of different covers, lots of different ideas for covers before I send probably my favorite 3 to my art director, and then we talk about which one they feel would work best. But I probably do a lot, as you can see here. So some they don't see. So 4 they would never even see. And we sort of go from there. This is a drawing I did for myself in my sketchbook. And here's another. This is actually the one that I probably sent to them. See a little better like that. That's the sketch for it. So I'd like to take you over here to my light box. And here I'm going to show you where I do most of my work. Is right at this light box. You can see it's a large piece of paper. It's a large light box. And on that light box I have tracing paper. And what I'll do is I'll start drawing everything out on this tracing paper. You can see how I have a right-hand side and a left-hand side. And this is the gutter. That's another good word for you to look up to find out what a gutter is. But I'll draw everything out, and I'll use tracing paper and Xeroxes, as you can see. I have a YouTube video called Building a Drawing, which shows you exactly how I do this. And this is how I arrange everything exactly the way I want it for my painting. And then I'll take a piece of watercolor paper, I'll put over this, just like I showed you before, on a small light box. And here I'll do one drawing, and then this will get stapled to the board, and then I'll paint the painting on the watercolor paper. And what you can see on my YouTube video, Working in Watercolors with James Ransome. So that's how I do it. I'd like to thank you for coming into my studio. Hope you enjoyed the tour, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care.